to UFHL now! A close-up look at the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League. The most realistic fantasy gameplay. High stakes. High reward. Here's your host, the owner of Duckman's Domination in the UFHL, and the Mighty Mallards of the UFAHL, Dean Millard.
Hello there, and welcome to another episode of UFHL Now. And, of course, we are on the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network, and it is all part of the Ultimate Franchise Fantasy Sports, combining fantasy sports and the blockchain. My name is Dean Millard. Welcome to the show. We got another excellent episode shaping up for you today. Apologies for the technical difficulties. This was supposed to be out a little bit earlier, but we ran into some computer issues that were above my pay grade, so I had to get a little bit of help with some things. But if you want to get in touch with us at the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network, it is very easy. You can get us on Twitter at UFS Network, or you can email us, ufsn@uffsports.com. And if you want to reach me directly, you can get me at Ducks Domination, as I am the owner, very proud owner of Duckman's Domination. So that's how you can get in touch with us. We are under the umbrella of the Ultimate Franchise Fantasy Sports. Thanks to Zilliqa, we are on the best blockchain on the planet, and coming very soon, a brand new website. There is so much excitement going on in this community, and I implore you, if you are not in it, to come join and see what all the fun is about. This week on the show, we're going to talk about the amazing auction that went down very recently on Monday. It was unbelievable to see everything build up to a $10,000 payout to bid that to buy that team. So we're going to recap a little bit about that. That was so much fun. Larry Fisher, our UFHL insider, is going to join us as usual. Tough to top last week's episode when he talked about Malkin being on the block, and then lo and behold, Evgeny Malkin ends up indeed getting traded. So that was pretty cool. And we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to take a look at some of the big hitters that are whiffing, some of the guys that are really, really doing well, and the top goalies in the UFHL. We'll do a top five. We'll take a look at some trade strategies that may be going on for teams as the April 12th trade deadline approaches. And we will also have a look at the top 10 in the standings. So all of that still to come on UFHL Now.
You're watching the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network, UFSN, your one-stop fantasy shop. Get in touch on Twitter at UFS Network. Email us, ufsn@uffsports.com.
So how about that expansion franchise auction? $10,000 US. Everybody I have told, their jaw has dropped because they're thinking about their $50, $75, $100, maybe $200, maybe even $1,000 entry to their fantasy leagues, and they're blown away by this. And you know what? That's the thing. It's not just fantasy. The NFTs that the winning group gets, unbelievable. An AHL team as well. There is so much to go and so much to build from this. So very exciting. And we as owners, we should be happy as well. We get a chunk of that money. So I'm going to spend some of it. I love this coffee mug, but I'm going to spend some of that money on some Duckman's Domination gear at the UFFS merchandise store. So really excited about that. So much going on. The $10,000 is a new record, and I love that Arlo Scholl's Vito on our Telegram chat, the owner of Stingrays, saying that nobody else should be selling for less than $10,000 now. And I totally agree with that. That's the base point. Whatever you bought in, $10,000 should be the minimum that you should be looking at if you are looking indeed at selling your franchise. So just so much excitement with the UFHL auction and a new sport coming on Sunday. We'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go. But let's get into the week that is going on since we last talked on Friday in the UFHL. And if you were an Oilers fan or a Leafs fan and you saw what happened to McDavid and Draisaitl and the entire Oilers team, big, dry drought. And it happened to McDavid. As, you know, at least Draisaitl had a point, but McDavid, for the Yetis, man, you just don't ever expect your best player, the best player in the game, in my opinion, to go 3 straight games, offensively anyway, to go 3 straight games without a point. The Yetis sit 4th, but during the last 7 days, they ranked 6th, so they definitely dropped down. Now, Mitch Marner had 4 points for the Yetis. Brock Besser having a 3-point week. As for the Grizzlies, they have Leon Draisaitl. They're 9th in the standings, but during this last week, they had just the 14th best output, and that Oiler-heavy lineup doesn't help because a lot of guys in Edmonton, as you would have saw if you're watching those series, they only scored 1 goal in 3 games. Not a lot going on. Draisaitl and McDavid getting some shots on goal, but also they're getting hurt in the plus-minus department. For the Grizzlies, Connor Hellebuck, brilliant save in overtime against the Habs the other day to get the overtime win, but also 6 goals in those 2 games. So that's why they've dropped a little bit as far as the overall rank, or the last 7 days when it comes to those kind of rankings. And then there's Mikko Rantanen, just the top producer since we last spoke, 29.5 points, just over that. One of the many reasons Red Army sits in first place. Mikko Rantanen just had an absolute blistering week. And the Titans, they're trying to stick with Red Army. 30 points they are within of the top dogs, and mostly thanks to Andrei Vasilevsky. 26.1 points since Friday, 3 wins and 2 shutouts. That's just ridiculous. If you're in any other head-to-head league, you won the goaltending week just on that alone. So impressive. As for Strong Island, Dougie Hamilton and Philip Forsberg had big fantasy production in the last 7 days, both of them in the top 10 for the past week on our Fantrax website for Strong Island. So very impressive stuff there. And Mark Stone, man, that was an amazing game he had, along with Max Pacioretty. But Stone had 5 points the other night against the Minnesota Wild. Then he added 2 points in their next game against the Wild. So the former Viking bringing the Crypto Knights within just 30 points of a playoff spot. 15th best in the last week. They sit 18th overall as of this recording. And Mark Stone, I've been a big fan. I was at the Memorial Cup that was in Brandon, and Scott Glennie got hurt or benched or whatever it was, and they put Mark Stone up on that line with Calvert and Schenn, and I thought, wow, this guy looks kind of out of place a little bit. Wasn't the greatest skater, but he's so smart. Just really one of the smartest players that can play the game. So no wonder Mark Stone is getting it done and helping things with the Crypto Knights. So congratulations to them. So I mentioned Andrei Vasilevsky. So it's time to take a look at the top 5 goaltenders right now in the UFHL. Vasilevsky, far and away the best in the UFHL. He has more than a 30-point lead on the next guy, who is Kevin Lankinen. Yeah, hands up. Who had Kevin Lankinen as being the second best goalie in the UFHL this year? I didn't think so. It's amazing. But, man, great stuff for Kevin Lankinen in the UFHL. Semyon Varlamov just dealt to the Ice Vikings. Marc-Andre Fleury, number 4 for Rock Republic, and the Vezina Trophy winner Connor Hellebuck for the Grizzlies round out the top 5. The Brutes' Philip Grubauer just 0.4 points of being tied with Hellebuck in the top 5. So, yeah, a little bit of a look at what's going on in the UFHL. I also love what goes on in our Telegram chat. And today, the Royals are standing by Alexander Ovechkin. Arnie Entz, the GM, says they don't think that spear on Trent Frederick was intentional. That did not sit well with Luke George Steinbrenner Grenier of MRA, Red Army. There was a great back and forth. He called the Royals soft for not disciplining their own player. And then assistant GM Brent Baldwin he got into it. Wasn't quite Brian Burke, Craig McTavish, or Kevin Lowe from years back, but it was pretty good entertainment. And speaking of entertaining, the Telegram chat last night, it's terribly sad news about Walter Gretzky and Chris Schultz today from the CFL on TSN, former CFLer. Just awful news of losing people. But sharing memories was so much fun, hearing all the great Walter Gretzky stories, and the joy coming through from Arlo Schultz-Vito from the Stingrays when Daryl Sutter was named head coach of the Calgary Flames. Will be really interesting to see what happens with the fantasy potential with some of the offensive players of the Calgary Flames, and how they go about trying to get back into it. Getting Markstrom back is going to be huge for them as well. Also, the trade deadline, April 12th in our league, just like the NHL. Teams are trying to make moves right now, and I applaud that. If I was a contender, I would be trying to get my moves out of the way. I'm not, so we're going to be waiting until that first week in a bit in April before we get rid of some of the players or trade some of our players. And we got guys like Justin Schultz and Scott Harrington that could be valuable for your team down the stretch. So you can come knocking right now and try to knock the doors off with a great offer, but most likely we're going to be waiting until then. But I applaud the teams that are trying to get the deadline early and making sure that because the price, obviously it goes up as the deadline approaches. And for Schultz and Harrington, those are guys that we can hold on to for next year if we don't trade them. That's the unique thing about this. It depends on the contracts. There are chances for you to walk away between an RFA and a UFA at times, but some other leagues, you're signing a contract and then you're maybe losing the player, so you're kind of under the gun to trade them. This is so much like the NHL, so that's the very, very cool thing. All right, let's take a look at the top 10 standings in the UFHL. And the brackets is what they were last week. You got Red Army still number 1, and they don't have a huge lead, but they do have a lead. The Titans jumped into number 2, jumping up from 4 last week. The Ice Vikings stay at 3. You got the Yetis in at number 4, dropping 2 spots, and pretty much the rest of the way stays the same, except for the Stingrays, who were not ranked, so they jump into the top 10. You're going to hear more about them with our UFHL insider, Larry Fisher. So that is the top 10. The Rock Republic Outlaws and Grizzlies and Blades of Steels both dropping 1 spot. The Rock Republic and the Outlaws staying the same. And we'll see what happens next week as we go into the weekend that will feature a Battle of Alberta.
Time to get the scoop on the UFHL with our insider, Larry Fisher. He's had lines in the water all week long. What will he reel in for us today? Let's dive in and find out what's going on with the UFHL. Now!
As I bring in the insider of the UFHL, Larry Fisher. And Larry, it's certainly going to be hard to top the debut of this segment last week with the Evgeny Malkin news that took place shortly after you brought it up on this segment. But I think we might have something, and I'm trying to think if I can remember what it... Oh, that's right. $10,000 for that expansion franchise. We were part of that live broadcast with Darren, and man, what an exciting time it was to be on that live broadcast.
Yeah, that bidding war was riveting to watch play out, to see it escalate from the morning at about 3,000 USD to around 5,000 at the scheduled deadline, and then to see the bidding war just continue with extension after extension, all the way up to 10,000 USD. And anybody who's willing to spend $10,000 on a franchise, fantasy hockey franchise, that tells you right there that they are serious players. I've met with the new owners since Monday, and I can tell you that it's a group of people. Obviously, Darwin Osman and Drew McDonald headed up along with the Bartlett group, but they have a number of guys involved, as far as a couple guys that are going to help out with analytics. And I can tell you right now that they are already in the process of hiring a GM. No spoiler on the name or the successful candidate, but I'm hearing that announcement is imminent and will be a talking point for us on the UFFS podcast this weekend. So stay tuned on the announcement for a general manager of the expansion franchise within the first week of its existence.
Yeah, that was so exciting. And, getting a fantasy hockey team in the UFHL and the all-important NFTs that come with it. And, we're moving to where we're on the Zilliqa blockchain. And there's so much excitement around the UFFS and the UFHL and the future that we have going on right now. It's really fun to be a part of something that is really building so strong and something that people are really going to start paying attention to.
Absolutely. And again, $10,000 USD was a record-setting sale for a franchise in the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League. And that really took us to another level, in my opinion. And obviously, everything that comes with that package, getting the UFHL affiliate, getting 31 selections in the expansion draft in July, and just that franchise as a whole, the expansion process will mirror NHL Seattle, the Kraken. And that's a franchise we're going to be talking about a lot on UFHL now and in this insider segment. I think the expansion franchise will be in the news quite consistently between now and the July 21st expansion draft.
Mm-hmm. Well, they'll have a GM very shortly, as it sounds like, and then they can start reaching out and making deals. And, oh, man, it's going to be so exciting. As exciting as it was last week when we talked about Gino Malkin on the trade block. And, there were some people saying, what are those guys talking about? Lo and behold, Luke, a.k.a. George Steinbrenner, pulls the string on the big deal, and the big Russian is leaving the Russians.
Red Army, right? I mean, that's their captain. They're based in Montreal, but the theme of Red Army is that they're a Russian franchise, and their captain, Russian star, you have Jenny Malkin, who, again, when you talk about NFTs, look at the value you have Jenny Malkin's going to have after he retires and potentially becomes a Legends League player. That's an impressive asset to part with, but they're in win now mode, Red Army, and they saw a player that's essentially a decade younger and equally productive, who's having a better season, more of a win now player as far as Kyle Connor from the Winnipeg Jets, as well as from the Elite Assassins. So Red Army and Elite Assassins, within 24 hours of us suggesting that if Jenny Malkin's name might be out there, he might be in play. He was on the move from Red Army to Elite Assassins, along with Gabriel Velarde and some cash considerations in exchange for Kyle Connor. So that was the big blockbuster to start this past week, and the trades haven't stopped. There's been a number of interesting trades. Another one, Barrett Hayton and Troy Terry were swapped for Kevin LeBlanc and Ryan Donato. So that was a cool fantasy trade as well that almost had real-world implications, and will be fun to follow to see how Hayton and Terry do with the Tornadoes, as well as LeBlanc and Donato back with the Generals. So that was one of the trades, but there's been 11 trades since we last talked, Dean, and the previous week there was 14. Like I said, there's never a dull moment in the UFHL, and the blockbusters just keep coming.
Yes, up again to double digits when it comes to trades in the UFHL. And, the Kevin LeBlanc deal, I would highly recommend that whenever he is playing the Oilers, put him in the lineup, because on the post-game shows, he always seemed to torch the Oilers when they would play San Jose. And one of those trades that we're going to talk about in those double digits of trades was a pretty impressive goalie swap.
Yeah, we've seen Kamikaze. They're staying busy. Donnie Tolkien, Kamikaze, put Semyon Varlamov on the trade block. Obviously, he's got a really good salary cap hit at $5 million. So he was an attractive asset because there's a lot of teams that are tight to the cap. But when you throw out a starting goaltender on a winning team, because wins obviously count in the scoring system, a guy like Semyon Varlamov hits the trade block, there's going to be immediate interest. And again, within 24 hours, Semyon Varlamov was moved in an absolute blockbuster, going to a top 4 franchise in the Ice Vikings in exchange for John Gibson, who's obviously not on a winning NHL team, but is one of the better NHL goaltenders, only 27 years old. Anaheim's going to trend up just like Kamikaze. And Kamikaze also included, so the actual trade was Semyon Varlamov and a 2023 first-round pick to the Ice Vikings in exchange for John Gibson and Adam Gaudette, and back to Kamikaze. And I think Adam Gaudette has some potential in the NHL. He hasn't really hit his stride yet, but he's a young player who was a Hobie Baker finalist or winner in the NCAA a couple of years ago, and I think he's got some upside. But the basis of that trade is Semyon Varlamov for John Gibson. And to see a trade of that magnitude involving two starting goaltenders this far into a season, it would be shocking in the NHL, and it was just as shocking in the UFHL, considering we mirror the NHL salary cap floor and ceiling. So for those guys to be able to swap starting goaltenders like Varlamov and Gibson at this point in the season was an impressive blockbuster and turned a lot of heads.
It is so interesting. I'm in a lot of other fantasy leagues, and I've actually had to text the owners to say, hey, can you go check the trade offer that I made you 3 days ago, please? In this league, things happen so fast. And as an example, I was speaking with the Grizzlies about Ethan Bear and Marcus Pettersson and a player on my team. And, we couldn't quite come to a deal. And then boom, both of those players traded in other deals. So first of all, you can't wait long if somebody makes you an offer, because there's always things going on. And B, if you want to get a player out there, it's really not that hard on our Telegram chat. So that's one of the coolest things about our league.
It is. And you mentioned Marcus Pettersson. There's another player who's on his way to the Kamikaze franchise. So again, Donnie Talk making a ton of moves since the start of February and trying to upgrade his current roster, as well as bringing in some younger guys. Pettersson's still under 25 years old, fits his age group well for the future. And he parted with Andrew Cogliano to the Grizzlies. Cogliano a little further along in his career, but still a productive fantasy guy who obviously kills penalties, gets some shorthanded points, all the rest. So that was kind of another minor trade for Kamikaze, was bringing in Marcus Pettersson in exchange for Andrew Cogliano. But you're right. If a player hits the trade bait board in the UFHL, they don't stay there long. They tend to be on the move sooner than later, just with how active all 31 franchises are. And now 32 franchises with the expansion franchise joining the fold. And certainly they'll have a name and a brand soon enough as well, a name and logos. And that expansion franchise, like I said, they're going to be trying to make some moves ahead of the expansion draft in July to at least set up some of the selections they'll have. But Kamikaze's been one of the franchises we highlighted last week as a franchise on the rise in the current standings, and certainly for the future. And they really are trying to upgrade the talent on their current roster and potentially to make a playoff push in the second half of the season.
Yeah, we chatted about them. We've chatted about the turnaround with Dynasty, and today we're chatting about the Stingrays, who are surging up.
The Stingrays, exactly. That's the hottest team in the UFHL over the last few weeks, even hotter than the Kamikaze. And I think with the Stingrays, they had some injuries and things didn't fall into place right out of the gate, but they have been patient with their group. They haven't had a fire sale or sold off. They stayed the course. Their owner, Arlo Scholes, was patient, and now it's paying dividends. His players are starting to pick up the pace. A guy like Alex DeBrincat, Jake Gensel, Sean Couturier's back from injury. He's got a lot of guys, again, that fit well with the scoring categories. But I think what we're seeing out of Stingrays is they're about to start being a buyer. They're about to become a buyer between now and the April 12th trade deadline. And again, their franchise owner, has deep pockets. He can whip out that checkbook or cut some checks and include some cash considerations to upgrade his roster. And you look at the Ice Vikings landing Semyon Varlamov as a goaltender who's going to give them some more fantasy points in the current season. I think with the Yetis and Ice Vikings battling for top spot and the Stingrays gaining ground on those two in the Lemieux division, I think the Stingrays want to be a player come the playoffs in May. So I think between now and that April 12th deadline, one of the franchises to keep a close eye on is the Stingrays, looking to upgrade and perhaps land a big name like of Jenny Malkin. I don't have a name to drop for you as to who they're after, but keep an eye on the Stingrays over the next month and a bit.
Well, I'll tell you, Duckman's Domination will have a few, not a lot, but a few players to definitely be selling at the deadline. So I'm looking forward to seeing, just how active and how aggressive people can be. Guys can have and girls can have that attitude where I'm going to go in and play it really cool, but then you hear about another team making a move and you want to be able to answer that. And that's where trade deadlines get so crazy, fast and furious. And, maybe one name that doesn't make it to the trade deadline is Dylan Larkin. You threw out Malkin last week, and we saw him change addresses. What are you hearing on Dylan Larkin?
Yeah, so the Outlaws general manager, Nick Utley, put Dylan Larkin on the trade block, kind of just floated him out there with a list of names that included guys like Thomas Hurdle and some other bigger names. But Larkin got the most interest, And there were offers that came in that the Outlaws wanted to move on, that they were interested in the package coming back. But of course, the salary cap exists in the UFHL, and unfortunately, it just didn't work out one way or the other, whether it was the Outlaws or the franchises that were trying to acquire Dylan Larkin. The cap space didn't balance out, and they haven't been able to strike a deal. So those trade talks have cooled a bit because it just didn't work with the salary cap. But certainly Dylan Larkin was the biggest name prior to Semyon Varlamov that was on the trade block since our last show, the debut episode of the UFHL now last week. But Dylan Larkin is still out there. It's just got to work from a salary cap perspective. And obviously the Outlaws aren't selling on Dylan Larkin. That's going to be a hockey deal because the Outlaws are a top 10 franchise and they don't want to, they're not rebuilding or taking back a ton of prospects. They want a comparable player. So I expect a hockey deal by and large if and when Dylan Larkin moves, but it's got to fit within the salary cap.
Yeah, maybe a defenseman for a forward or potential goaltender or something like that. As you know, positions are just forwards in ours, so you don't specifically have to get that right shooting right winger. You can, and you know, like the Calgary Flames looking for that right shooting right winger right now if you want to be that specific. But it's interesting when you talk about the salary cap and how important that is to obviously be above the floor and then be below the ceiling. And one way, and you and I have talked about this a lot, one way you can do that is by having talented players on entry-level contracts. And there seems to be a bit of divide in our league. And like all good leagues, there's different personalities and different ways of doing it. But there seems to be a bit of a divide on how valuable draft picks are in our system.
That is the one marketplace that is evolving from season to season for sure, but even throughout the season. And there are a lot of franchises that are readily willing to get rid of their first round picks, even if they're a top 10 pick, because in our system, the draft picks are an auction. It's an entry auction as opposed to just a draft. And so you do have to bid against 5 other franchises in order to use your draft pick. You have to emerge as the highest bidder and then select the prospect of your choice. So you need that pick to be in the bidding, but it is an auction. And some franchises, whether they're smaller budget or they just don't value draft picks, have been eager to trade away picks, including top 10 picks. And then some of the franchises are stockpiling those first round picks. I know Duckman's Domination has 6 first round picks in 2021. And certainly the franchises that are affiliated with scouting agencies who have top prospects in these upcoming drafts are eager to take on more draft picks and build through the draft, like I said, around cheap entry-level contracts, which is so important in the NHL. And I really do think the draft and develop model in the UFHL is going to eventually bump up the trade value in those draft picks. And what I think, Dean, is that closer to the draft, maybe not ahead of the trade deadline, you might not see a star player for a first round pick necessarily, or even a top prospect for a first round pick. But when that draft rolls around, when that entry auction, it's the week of, and people are eager to be bidding on Owen Power and Jesper Wallstad and the following year, Shane Wright, you're going to see some massive packages exchanged in order for teams. Maybe the Klein Cup champion or a top team will want to get in on that bidding, and they'll do what it takes to acquire those picks. So I think selling low on your draft picks is a bad idea. I think they hold a lot of value come the draft time, but in general, I think draft and develop is a model that we're going to see. The teams that build through the draft are going to be climbing the standings in the years to come.
Yeah, draft picks might not be very valuable in February, but June in a regular year when the draft is right around the corner, they seem to gain a little bit of value. And value is exactly what we talk about because these are NFTs. And, you know, I'm not just saying to another GM in trade talks that, hey, I took this guy with a top 10 pick. I'm saying I took this guy with the top 10 pick and I spent $2,000 on him or something like that. I'm going to need some real value to get back. You know, there is and I don't mind anybody else's strategy if it's all for them, but you know, if you think that you could just wait and sit back and get these draft picks really cheap or these prospects really cheap a couple years down the road, it's not going to happen from that team, I can tell you that much. So everybody values it differently, and that's the beautiful thing about this ecosystem is we're not all, you know, copycats, right? It's not just like the same system, cookie cutter systems, and I think that's what makes it so beautiful.
There are a lot of strategies at play with regards to draft picks, and I think you nailed it there, Dean. I think that's going to continue to evolve in the years to come. But in my opinion, the value of the draft pick is only going to go up. And like you said, I think a lot of franchises are under the impression that let somebody else bid on the player, let somebody else spend that money, and then I'll trade for him a couple months down the road. And I think you're sorely mistaken, because you know what that franchise that paid thousands of dollars for that top prospect's going to want? They're going to want a star player back who is, maybe you got him for quote unquote free in the redraft or the initial draft, and you didn't pay for that player out of pocket. You're going to be giving up a player that's worth more as an NFT value in exchange for that prospect. So whether you pay for the prospect and you build around cheap entry-level contracts, or you acquire the prospect in exchange for a player that you may have got for free, not out of pocket, but that player you're giving up, you need to realize what his value is, and chances are the player you're giving up's value is even higher than the prospect you're acquiring, even though it's not out of pocket down the road. And if that franchise sells, the franchise that spent the money on the prospect and then acquired a proven star, that franchise value just went up more than what they spent on that prospect.
Well, the beautiful thing about the UFHL Insider segment is not only are you letting the GMs know which players they're going to be trading in the future, you're also giving out free advice. I mean, this is amazing. What is the advice that you're doling out to owners and GMs today?
Well, there's a couple topics I wanted to touch on and give a heads up to owners. And the first one is the use of LTIR, long-term people call it injury reserve, but it's actually injury or cap relief. So what happens with LTIR is the ceiling actually goes up. So if you put a player on LTIR, you can spend over the cap ceiling by that amount of salary. But the catch here is, if you have players on LTIR and that trade deadline comes and goes and that player returns in the NHL, and you've been maximizing that extra cap space above and beyond the ceiling, well, guess what? Your roster is illegal if he comes back after the trade deadline and you can't trade. The only way to continue accruing or earning fantasy points is to waive a player to get yourself back under the ceiling. So if you're using the LTIR to maximize your cap space in the present, you're above technically above the cap ceiling because your player's on LTIR with a $7 million contract. You better be aware of that looming April 12th trade deadline and better get back below the ceiling, unless you know for sure a guy like Oscar Klefbom, he's out for the season. He's not going to play this year. But if there's any chance of that player returning, you better be below the salary cap, or you're going to be waiving a star player in order to continue to accumulate fantasy points. Because if you're over the ceiling, A, you get fined, and B, you forfeit all your fantasy points, not just from that player, but your entire lineup's fantasy points for as long as you're over the salary cap. So be very aware of LTIR, and if you're using it, great, maximize the cap space, but know that April 12th trade deadline's just over a month away, and you know the status of your NHL player, because if he surprisingly comes back and you took that risk, you could get burned, and you might have to waive that player or another expensive star player and accept whatever the return is off the waiver wire. And there may not be many franchises cap space wise, like we said, that can get in that bidding war on a $5 or $10 million player on waivers. So Duckman's Domination will gladly have you be above and beyond the salary cap and using the LTIR and be one of the bidders for a star player that frees up that way. But you'd hate to see a franchise get burned in the first full season of the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League for trying to mimic the NHL and take advantage and play the salary cap as far as LTIR goes, and then have that player surprisingly return in the NHL, of Vladimir Tarasenko or whoever, he's skating again, and be over the cap with an illegal roster. So just be very aware of April 12th trade deadline and your usage of LTIR.
Yeah, and there's so many things to be aware of. Email went out, I think today or yesterday, about call-ups and making sure that you have the what is a call-up, what isn't a call-up. So there's a lot of things to be aware of. Just shuttling guys in and out of your lineup, and one of our teams, unfortunately, it cost them some fantasy points.
Yeah, the other big thing, the other tidbit of advice, friendly advice, is if you're going to demote a player from your active roster down to your minor league system or to your protected list, you better check Cap Friendly's Waivers Calculator tool. It's right there. Bookmark the link to Cap Friendly's Waivers Calculator tool and double check, because with the waivers system, we mirror the NHL, and so it obviously goes by how many seasons you've played, but it also goes by how many games you've played. There's two different factors in determining whether or not a player is waiver exempt or waivers eligible. And some players do they're waiver exempt at the start of the season, and halfway through the season, they lose that eligibility to go down without clearing waivers. And you need to be aware of that. So you got to be tracking the waiver status of all your players at all times, especially your young guys. And like you said, unfortunately, the Monarchs with Yakov Trenin and the North Stars with Nick Merkley. Nick Merkley, former first-round pick, he's only played a dozen NHL games, but believe it or not, he's no longer waiver exempt. He had to clear waivers for the New Jersey Devils to go to the taxi squad and to go down to their farm team. So likewise, he had to clear waivers in the UFHL. And unfortunately, the North Stars moved Nick Merkley down to their protected list without announcing a waivers auction or putting him through waivers. And it did cost them a week's worth of fantasy points as well as a fine. So if you have young players, if you're at all uncertain, you got to be double checking Cap Friendly's waivers calculator tool prior to demoting any of your players from the active roster to the protected list.
Yeah, it is so important. And a lot of guys are waiver eligible, they waiver exempt rather, at the start of the season and then become waiver eligible during the season. So you really have to be on top of things before you're moving guys up and down from those rosters. Well, I know that there was some big excitement with the UFHL expansion this week, and I know this is UFHL now, but there's also going to be more excitement this weekend because another sport will be revealed, and you and Darren will be covering it all on UFFS podcast on Sunday. I'm certainly looking forward to that, as I'm sure you are as well.
Yeah, we're very excited about the launch of a new sport for the UFFS platform. Obviously, as much as I'm the insider and I may have a scoop on that, we're not going to spill the beans. No spoiler on the new sport today, but certainly that's a reason to tune in on the weekend on Sunday for the UFFS podcast as well. Like we said, my understanding is we might have a general manager announcement on as well as part of that podcast from the expansion franchise. So there's going to be that's going to be an action-packed podcast on Sunday, so certainly tune into the latest episode of the UFFS podcast.
Excellent stuff. Looking forward to chatting with you again on Sunday, Larry. Thanks so much for this.
Thanks for having me, Dean.
This is UFHL Now with Dean Millard. Get in the game, where you own the game.
Always fun chatting with our UFHL insider, Larry Fisher. And I wonder if it'll be Dylan Larkin packing his bags after that segment. Big news this weekend. We could be hearing about a new GM for the expansion franchise. That will be very exciting if that comes to fruition, as the insider alluded to. There's also a new sport being announced on Sunday, and that is so exciting as the UFFS platform continues to grow. And that's going to wrap things up on our show. We will have the UFFS podcast on Sunday with Darren Bates and Larry Fisher, and meet the two new owners in the UFHL expansion franchise purchase. Also, we'll have Fantasy Hockey Time. That will come out Monday morning. Tracking the Draft with Craig Button. It comes out Wednesday afternoon. And then we'll have this show again on Friday, as well as 2 Minute Tuesday on Tuesdays, of course, with Darren Bates. Thank you so much to Larry Fisher for his time and the tidbits that he brought with us. Thank you to everybody participating in the UFHL that is watching this. Thank you so much for your support. And I look forward to chatting with you guys next week. Have yourselves a great weekend.
UFHL Now is produced by DM Productions. To get in touch, head to www.podcastalley.ca.